dig deeper into the Iraq crisis. Joining me now are two men. Both have held senior positions, both with deep experience on Iraq. Ryan Crocker was the U.S. ambassador to Iraq from 2007 to 2009. He is now the dean of the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M. Richard Haass was director of policy planning at the State Department during George W. Bush's first term. He is now the president of the Council on Foreign Relations. Ambassador Crocker, John McCain has said that one of the things he would do was send you back to Baghdad. I want to know what you would do were you there, and I want to ask you specifically why you think the Maliki would listen to you. You were telling him to be inclusive and to do all the things that people now want him to do, and there were 100,000 American troops there at the time. Do you think you will be able to do anything if you were to go?
Fareed, we have a very, very good ambassador there right now in the person of Steve Beecroft. But ambassadors can't do it all. You need heavy fire support on the diplomatic front. So if I were asked to return to Iraq, the first thing I would request is that Secretary Kerry get on a plane immediately. We have lacked that high-level engagement with the Iraqis. That was so crucial during my term in office. So we need the Secretary of State out there in Baghdad right now. We need the President on the phone to the Iraqi leadership, because the reality is the Iraqis are not in a position, they were not in a position when I was there, they are not in a position now to work out hard compromises on their own. It's zero-sum politics, and there are a lot of strong historical reasons for that. It is not all Maliki's fault, although he does bear substantial blame. We are the essential middleman among Sunni, Shia, and Kurds. Ambassadors can go just so far.
Would you, Ambassador, use airstrikes? You heard Nick Robertson, who said that the Sunni tribes, a lot of Sunnis would feel, it appears to me, that these were airstrikes by the United States in support of a Shia government. Would you still support the airstrikes?
I would support very carefully targeted airstrikes, but they would have to be in conjunction with a serious high-level diplomatic effort that would engage the Shia, the Sunni, and the Kurdish leadership. We have got to help the Iraqis come together in a unified fashion to confront a common threat. The airstrikes, again, properly targeted, could help back up that we are serious about this, we are engaged. The politics have to take the forefront, but as we have seen in the past, they've got to be backed up by, the second D, which is defense.
Richard Haass, what are the dangers here, and what would you do?
I think the horse has left the barn, and by that I mean, Fareed, I think it's too late for the kind of diplomacy that Ryan Crocker's talking about, as desirable as it might have been months or years ago. I also think, essentially, the idea of Iraq, that's a united, functioning country, good idea, but again, I think that's essentially over. So at this point, what I would focus on is making the best of a terrible situation. I would put pressure on this ISIS group in Syria. It's long since time to provide serious help to alternative opposition elements in Syria, so they don't have the luxury of just focusing on Iraq. I would accept the fact that the Kurdish area of the north is now effectively an independent state. I would make sure they had essentially what they need. I would provide economic support for Jordan, which is staggering under the enormous refugee burden. I would rethink our policy towards Afghanistan. The last thing we want to do now is not have a residual force there. We ought to have learned the lesson here in Iraq. And I think we could use airstrikes, as Ryan says, but quite honestly, at most it's going to delay things. It's not going to be decisive. It's not going to be lasting. Maybe we can bring about a serious government of national unity, but it hasn't worked now for over a decade, so quite frankly, I'm skeptical.
Ryan, what would you do in Syria? I know that, on this program you have been very cautious about intervening there, seeing it as you called it a forest fire that one just had to let burn out. Do you think there's anything one can do in Syria that would be meaningful?
Fareed, I've been saying for months that our main effort has got to be on Syria's neighbors. Richard rightly points out that Jordan is under tremendous pressure, so is Lebanon. And again, I've been saying for months we need to be doing more in Iraq, and we're now seeing, I think, the consequences of not doing more. I would disagree with Richard in saying that it's too late for diplomacy. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I think the Iraqis, Sunni, Shia, and Kurds are all badly frightened here. There is a moment for us to step in. The Iranians are heavily engaged. Qasem Soleimani is in Baghdad, head of the Quds Force. Well, you know, the American Secretary of State needs to be in Baghdad too to see what can be done, because the stakes are very high here. This is Al-Qaeda 6.0, and if they consolidate their territorial gains, they will be in a stronger position than they ever were in Afghanistan prior to 9/11. And we know how that turned out.
Richard, describe what you see as the new Middle East then, because what you're describing, as far as I can tell, is the United States strategy that really shores up the islands of stability, Jordan, Turkey, Kurdistan, the Gulf states, of course, and accepts that there are going to be very messy badlands in the Middle East.
Alas, Fareed, I think that's where we are. The Middle East we know was essentially drawn up or designed 100 years ago by the British and French foreign minister, and that Middle East is unraveling. If there's a historical analog here, and it's not going to make you or anyone watching this program feel very happy, it's Europe in the early part of the 17th century, when you had political religious wars within and across boundaries. It lasted for 30 years. And I think we're into that sort of a situation in the Middle East. There's no boundary anymore between, say, Syria and Iraq. It may exist on a map on paper, but not in reality. So we have identities now that don't in any way line up with where the formal borders are. So what we have to do is preserve those areas, as you say, where we have friends, where we have real interest, where we see some reason to believe that American involvement would pay off. Other areas, I think we simply have to try to contain. So that might mean treating parts of the Middle East the same way now we have to treat parts of Africa, say, or say parts of Pakistan. These are no-go lands. These are bad lands. We need to have counterterrorism strategies, use drones, use aircraft, maybe even special forces on occasion, but we can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And if 100,000 American troops or more for a decade in Iraq couldn't do it, we had similar problems in Afghanistan, I think we've got to accept the limits of what it is we can accomplish. Sometimes in foreign policy you try to create. Other times in foreign policy you try to prevent. And I think right now with the Middle East we need to focus more on what it is we prevent rather than on what we create.
Thank you. Both fascinating perspectives. Greatly appreciated.